our witnesses. I believe you've been instructed on the earpieces. Channel 01 is the English channel. There'll be some comments right away en français, so you're welcome to test it out. J'ouvre maintenant la séance. Bonjour tout le monde.
I open this meeting. Welcome to meeting 112 of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts.
Person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Reminder that all comments should be addressed to the chair. Conformément à l'article 108 3G du règlement, le comité d'Europe du rapport 1 arrive.
Pursuant to Standing Order 108, the committee is reviewing its study of Report 1 Arrive Can, referred to committee on February 12, 2024.
Partner and national leader, digital health transformation practice, and Hartaj Nijar, partner, national leader, cybersecurity. Ms. Lee, I understand you're going to give an opening statement for 5 minutes. I'm just going to make a quick comment on today's witnesses just to kind of set it up for members. I've invited KPMG to come in today. As many of you know, they were not subject to the audit. That is why the Auditor General is not here. The auditor has no authority to audit private companies like this. Having said that, as you'll recall from the Auditor General's testimony, there was so little documents within the federal government. I thought, as the chair, it was worth having them to talk to us about the practices, some of the contact with government. So I expect the questions you're going to get today are going to be along those lines. So if you're able to be as forthcoming as possible, the committee would appreciate it. So without any further ado, Ms. Lee, I'd ask you for your opening statement. About 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the members of the committee for inviting us to contribute to this important conversation about our work with the government during the COVID-19 pandemic. We're looking forward to answering your questions. My name is Lydia Lee, and I am a partner and national leader for digital health transformation at KPMG in Canada. I have more than 25 years of experience in the healthcare sector, including more than 14 years as a senior leader at a hospital prior to joining KPMG. I have focused much of my career on healthcare transformation, and I'm very passionate about helping to improve the health and lives of Canadians. I'm also joined today by Hartaj Nijar, a KPMG partner and national leader for cybersecurity. Hartaj brings over 2 decades of experience assisting some of the world's largest organizations on matters relating to cybersecurity. Together, we are here to represent KPMG Canada, which employs more than 10,000 people across the country. KPMG in Canada is fully owned and operated by Canadians. We have been serving Canadian businesses, organizations, and communities across the country for over 150 years. Nearly 80% of our clients are small and medium-sized businesses, the backbone of our economy. Our role is to assist our clients, including governments at federal, provincial, and municipal levels, to identify and close strategic and operational gaps, providing specialized knowledge and services in areas where support is required. We consider our services to be an important part of our contribution to Canadian society. We are known for our tax, advisory, and auditing services. And as you know, we are the auditor for the House of Commons. We also provide a comprehensive range of services that help Canadian businesses address many of the most pressing economic and social challenges we face as a country. Notably, this includes public health and cybersecurity, which is why we are here to talk to you today. At the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, the government urgently looked for outside expertise and invited vendors to respond to a public request for proposal. KPMG responded by competing in this procurement process and was selected as one of 6 vendors under the COVID Emergency Professional Services, or CEPS, contracting vehicle. This competitive process and the resulting contract provided government departments and agencies with the ability to engage firms like KPMG for specialized global expertise. Our engagement with the government during the pandemic included work related to the Arrive Can program, which fell into 2 streams. The first, which I led, was for the Public Health Agency of Canada. As one of Canada's largest healthcare advisory firms, the agency looked to us as they dealt with an unprecedented and rapidly evolving pandemic. In particular, we were asked to provide in-depth subject matter expertise and global knowledge to assist in developing policies and procedures for the implementation of the Arrive Can program. We analyzed how travelers and government operations would be impacted by the evolving policies, supported extensive stakeholder engagement to solicit feedback on emerging issues, and applied international leading practices to help limit the transmission of COVID-19 to Canadians from international travel at air, land, and sea border crossings. Put simply, when the government decided to make the ArriveCAN application mandatory, we identified and helped address the significant implications of that decision for all Canadians, including travelers, government operations, and the travel industry. All of the services we provided were part of the public procurement process. The second stream of work was conducted by Mr. Nijar's team and was cybersecurity work subcontracted through GC Strategies on behalf of CBSA Canada. KPMG is known in the field for having strong expertise in cybersecurity. Between October 2021 and March of 2022, KPMG provided an independent cybersecurity assessment of the ArriveCAN application. This assessment included a review of practices, procedures, and configurations related to the ArriveCAN mobile app, web portals, and cloud hosting environment. Our work was completed on time and on budget and was reviewed and approved by CBSA. We are very proud of the services that KPMG provided to assist the government during the pandemic. We delivered highly specialized expertise at a time of unprecedented uncertainty for Canadians and the world. We recognize the importance of the committee's efforts to review this work and to ensure value for money for Canadians. In each case, we delivered our work on time and on budget using the contracting vehicle identified and directed by the government. Thank you, and we'd be happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much. We'll begin our first round. Each of the four members will have 6 minutes each. Mr. Baird, I understand you're up first for the official opposition. Over to you, please, for 6 minutes.
KPMG is one of the biggest accounting firms in the world. How many offices do you have in Canada?
Thank you for the member's question. I'll answer that to the chair. I don't actually know the answer off the top of my head, but I would be happy to respond to that question immediately after.
Do you know how many staff KPMG has in Canada?
Thank you for the member's question, and I'll also try to answer that question. I do know that we have about 800 partners, and in terms of the total number of staff, again, I would have to get back to you with that answer.
So you said in your opening statement that KPMG was subcontracted by GC Strategies. So you, off the top of your head, fair enough that you're not sure. How many offices are there? Are a lot of KPMG offices and hundreds of staff. Does KPMG operate any of their offices out of the basements of suburban Ottawa residences?
Thank you for the member's question. I'll answer that to the chair. We do not have any businesses run out of basements that we're aware of.
Right. So I find it incredible that that KPMG, this massive accounting firm with hundreds and hundreds of staff and dozens of offices, ends up as a subcontractor for two dudes working out of a basement in suburban Ottawa. How much were you paid, KPMG, by GC Strategies for your work on ArriveCAN?
Thank you for the question. I can take that one as it relates to the cybersecurity piece of work. So we charged GC Strategies $400,000 for the cybersecurity piece of work that we performed for the ArriveCAN app.
So it was cybersecurity work.
Exactly, yes.
Could ArriveCAN have got off the ground without KPMG's contributions?
Thank you for your question. With respect to the ArriveCAN app, KPMG was not involved in the development of the ArriveCAN app. We were involved for the assessment of the security of the ArriveCAN app, and it was already off the ground when we were assessing it.
Did KPMG contact the Government of Canada regarding work on ArriveCAN first, or did the Government of Canada contact KPMG first?
Thank you for the member's question. I'll answer that to the chair. So KPMG initially participated in the CEPS agreement that I mentioned in the opening remarks. We were awarded a spot on that vendor of record contracting vehicle in July of 2020, and our work was subsequently contracted off of that vehicle.
and we'll just accept that all of your questions are through the chair. Thank you. How many non-competitive contracts related to ArriveCan was KPMG awarded?
So thank you again for your question. What I'd like to say is, first of all of our work was contracted through the government's vehicles, procurement vehicles that were directed to us.
Understood. Just the number of non-competitive contracts, please.
So the contracts that were directed to KPMG for and I'm talking about the public health agency work at this point, we had a TA that was directed to us through the SEPS vehicle, and then there were 2 subsequent contracts that were directed to us through public health agency.
So the number's 3.
For the public health agency related work.
And those non-competitive contracts were amended multiple times. Yes or no, please?
Sorry, thank you for the member's question. I just want to confirm that the initial TA was through the competitive SEPS vehicle, so that was competitively awarded and then subsequently directed to us. And sorry, could you repeat the second question, please?
The contracts were amended multiple times. Yes or no?
Thank you for the member's question. And yes, our contracts were amended a few times.
So those amendments saw the fee for service increase, the length of time for the contract increase, and the deliverables reduced. Is that correct?
Thank you for the member's question. So the initial TA and the initial contract through Public Health Agency were incredibly detailed in terms of deliverables and key activities we were asked to provide. The subsequent and the final contract that was awarded by the Public Health Agency was less so by Public Health Agency, specifically because you have to remember that this was during the 3rd and 4th wave of the pandemic, and they required more flexibility because of wanting to be able to respond to unforeseen events and policy changes at the time.
So just for clarity, the Auditor General said in her report that KPMG had contracts amended to do exactly what I detailed. Add additional costs, make the deliverables over a longer period of time with less specific deliverables. Do you agree with the Auditor General's assessment? Yes or no, please.
Thank you for the member's question, and we agree with the Auditor General report findings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who in the government was KPMG's contact for the non-competitive contracts that KPMG received?
So,
the name of the individual at the department, please.
So I'd be happy to start just the description of that through the Public Health Agency work, and then I might ask Hartaj to speak to the other contract.
You have about 10 seconds to get us a name before the end of my time.
So
please.
we were contacted through the SEPS vehicle to work with the Public Health Agency under Sharif Abdu.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Turning now to Ms. Bradford, who's joining us virtually. You have the floor for 6 minutes, please, Ms. Bradford. You're on mute, Ms. Bradford. And I've not started
I'm always
clock yet.
best on me.
Very good. Over to you.
Thank you very much. So thank you for the witnesses for coming today. So some of this might be a bit repetitive from your opening comments, but I just want to get it on the record. Could you please help the committee members and Canadians watching from home to understand what specific services were provided for the $5 million received in government contracts by KPMG for the Arrive Canada app? And what work did KPMG specifically provide for this?
And I can definitely take that for the Public Health Agency work, and then I'll ask my colleague Hartaj to speak to the cybersecurity work in a moment. So the work that we did to support the Public Health Agency was focused primarily on helping them to analyze and plan for the operational impacts of all of the evolving policies that were happening under the Quarantine Act during the pandemic. So this included detailed stakeholder and extensive stakeholder engagement, both within government and helping them to facilitate discussions outside of government, for example, with the travel sector, air operators, and so on. We also were asked to provide global leading expertise and access to information through KPMG's global network of colleagues to help inform policies that we're forming here in Canada. So, for example, we reached out through our global network to the Five Eye countries, to other jurisdictions to learn how they were handling the COVID-19 pandemic quarantine restrictions, eventually how they were handling things like lab testing, vaccine administration, documentation, and so on for international travel. The other thing, too, that I'll just mention is that at that time, KPMG was providing very specialized expertise to the Public Health Agency to address what we understood were some capability gaps in terms of being able to quickly support their detailed planning in things like human-centered design, because we were trying to understand what the traveler's experience would be through all of these policy changes and operational changes at the borders. So we were developing journey maps, process designs, all in very, very rapid pace to support their constantly evolving policy environment. So that was essentially the nature of the work that we did under the Public Health Agency, but maybe I'll let Hartaj speak to the other work.
Sure. So with respect to the cybersecurity work, there were 5 primary bodies of work. The first was to assess the vulnerability management practices around the ArriveCAN environment. So that is to do with how do you identify vulnerabilities and mitigate vulnerabilities in a timely manner. The second was to assess compliance with certain privacy regulations, in particular surrounding the cloud hosting platform. The third was to assess the cloud hosting platform itself to understand if appropriate security controls were embedded. The fourth was to understand whether appropriate incident response processes were in place such that if there were an incident or a breach of some sort, would it be possible to respond and recover in a timely fashion? And the last was to do with understanding whether appropriate security practices were integrated within the development processes.
Okay, thank you for those detailed responses. So can you confirm the total amount that KPMG received for this work on the ArriveCAN application?
Thank you for the member's question. I'll just want to reconfirm that KPMG did not do any work on the development of the app itself. However, for the Public Health Agency work that was contracted to KPMG, we invoiced about $4.5 million before taxes. And
for the cybersecurity work, we invoiced $400,000 for that work.
Okay, thank you so much. So it is the approximately $5 million. Can you please explain why KPMG was not able to receive a contract directly from the government or CBSA in this case to work on the ArriveCAN app or the work that you provided in this process? And why did they need to be subcontracted by GC Strategies?
Thank you for your question. I can take that one as I believe it relates to the cybersecurity work. KPMG would have been proud to contract under any vehicle or even to bid in a competitive RFP process. We were asked to subcontract through GC Strategies and we complied with the government's request.
So how was the decision made on KPMG's end to become a subcontractor for GC Strategies? You said they reached out. What was the process involved where you made that decision that you would subcontract through GC Strategies?
So thank you again for the question. So when KPMG is contracting with a party, be it a client or a partner or an entity, we have rigorous client acceptance and engagement acceptance processes which we must follow in every case. And we followed those processes to understand if there would be any adverse considerations in engaging with GC Strategies. And at the time, our results showed that there were no adverse considerations in contracting with GC Strategies, given that they were at the time a well-known entity in the government sector, and we were being asked to contract with them by the government.
Have either one of you met with Christian Firth or Darren Anthony, either one of you?
Thank you for your question. I have not met with either of those individuals, and I believe Ms. Lee has also not met with those individuals.
I have not.
Thank you, Ms. Bradford. That is the time. Coming up next is our Bloc Québécois member, so you might want to have your earpiece ready if it's not already. Madame Sinclair Desgagnés pour 6 minutes. On prend les deux langues officielles au sérieux ici.
Ms. Sinclair Desjardins, you have 6 minutes, and if there's any delays for the translation, I would like to get a few extra seconds so that we don't, thinking of the Francophones, thank you for coming here. At the outset, I did my career in your field. I know how things work. Setting aside the capital itself, what's the most important thing in the Big Four is the reputation. And at that time, the reputation of KGBM, at least in the eyes of this committee, and according to the report of the Auditor General, has been dealt an adverse blow. Thank you very much for coming and answering our questions. My first question is, with respect to the contract that you were subtracted to do through GC Strategies, who in the government asked whom in KHMP to accept to be a subcontractor for GC Strategies? And I would prefer to have a very brief answer, please.
Thank you for your question. So KPMG was contacted by a CBSA official, and his name was Mr. Antonio Utano. And this individual asked the KGMP, a company with 10,000 employees, I do know that for a fact, to accept to be a subcontractor and to lose out on part of the profits that you could have done had you had a direct conference with the government. So it's Mr. Antonio who asked you to become a subcontractor with GC Strategies. First of all, why would you have accepted that? Thank you for your question. KPMG would have charged the government the same amount that we charged to GC Strategies for the work that we actually performed. With respect to the work, we were asked to submit a proposal to GC Strategies, and our assumption was when KPMG is asked to submit a proposal, our assumption is others are also asked to submit a similar proposal, and the proposal that is ultimately the best is awarded the work.
Merci, je sais très bien comment ça marche.
Thank you. I know how it works. Why did you agree to be a subcontractor to a two-person company? Yes, perhaps you charge the same amount, but you know full well that there's something that doesn't smell right when you, for example, you knew that any consultant who is awarded a contract with someone else must fill out forms with respect to risk assessment. And do you not think that GC Strategy had a risk involved with it for a company like yours? KPMG should have seen this, and somebody who working on the project should have understood that there was a huge risk working with a two-person company. This is a real reputational risk, and you're the evidence of that today.
Thank you for your question. So, as indicated earlier, KPMG does follow rigorous client acceptance processes, and at the time, GC Strategies was an organization that had been working in the government sector for a number of years successfully, and they had a large government contract, and they were well known in the government sector industry. And our checks did not indicate any adverse implications of engaging with GC Strategies. Furthermore, KPMG was directed to do so by the government, and so we had understood that the government had followed its own processes to vet GC Strategies as well.
D'accord. Mais donc, si vous avez accepté...
So if you agree to this and you were aware of its reputation, you were aware of GC Strategies, you said you didn't know the two people who agreed to work with GC Strategies.
Thank you for your question. So KPMG as a whole agreed to work with GC Strategies, and then we deployed an engagement team to work directly with the CBSA once we'd been notified that the proposal was successful, and then we submitted our engagement letters to GC Strategies, and once they informed us that the engagement letters were approved, we then worked directly with the CBSA.
Vous dites KPMG au total, mais il y a une personne.
You say that KPMG in a whole, but is there an associate or a chief director who agreed to contact with GC Strategy. There was a full team that worked with them, or at least in providing the work to GC Strategy so they in turn could deliver the work to the government. Could you tell me how many people were part of this team and who was in direct contact with GC Strategies? Who in KPMG was in direct contact with GC Strategy and was aware of the reputation?
Thank you for your question. There was a full team deployed to complete the work, security cleared at various different levels from partner all the way down to senior consultant level to complete the work in the time that it took. In terms of the contract itself, so it was signed by a partner in our cybersecurity team within Ottawa, and he engaged directly with GC Strategies just for the contract, and then once that was done, then we had
Cet
very
associé
little to
travaille-t-il
do with...
encore pour KPMG?
Does this associate still work for KPMG?
Thank you. Yes, he does.
Et
Yes.
pourquoi n'est-il pas là aujourd'hui, sachant que c'est lui qui...
And why isn't he here today, given that he's the one who dealt with GC Strategy? He should be here today to answer questions put to him by our committee.
Thank you for your question. So the reason I am here today is because I'm the national leader of cybersecurity, so any work that we perform underneath cybersecurity falls within my purview and my responsibility.
Il y a des chaises vides à côté de vous. Il aurait dû être prêt.
There are some empty chairs beside you. He should have been here to explain his relationship with GC Strategies. We asked to deal with people who had direct information with respect to our Reef Canada and who had direct contact with GC Strategy. You should have known that the empty chairs should have been filled by someone. I'm finished, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Desjardins, Mr. Desjardins, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being present with us today. I want to turn to, I think, a few topics that Canadians are most concerned about in relation to KPMG's work and the work of GC Strategies, the Public Health Agency of Canada, and the CBSA. What is becoming clear in this is that there's certainly a network that is operating when government contracts are either disposed of by way of individuals within the CBSA, like we see through ArriveCan, that have largely in some ways influenced the decision of contractors. Mr. Najjar, you just mentioned that, quote, GC Strategies was well known as a government contractor and a trusted source. Why is it that you come to that conclusion in relation to GC Strategies? Who told you that they were trusted, or how long have they been in your network to suggest that they're a trusted partner of that of the government or that of KPMG?
Thank you for your question. So in terms of GC Strategies being well known in the community, they had worked in that particular industry sector for a number of years, well over 5 years, and that was known amongst folks that work in that community within the FedGov space.
Is that because of subcontract relationship?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Just that last point you made. You said they were well known amongst the community, but how are they well known amongst the community? Is that because of their nature as a subcontractor? People would go to GC Strategies looking for work?
Thank you for the question. They were well known with respect to doing work in that space. My answer wasn't directly with respect to them being sort of a prime for subcontracting work.
I'm trying to understand, and I hope that you can sympathize with Canadians who are trying to understand this relationship. How is it that non-competitive contracts were awarded to 3 groups in particular that were known to each other, that you said were known amongst the community? I'm trying to discover or understand why this relationship or network exists. Is it because of GC Strategies as a conduit for subcontractors, because of their knowledge of subcontractors, that they could secure government contracts? Was that known to the community? Is that also well known?
So thank you for your question. At the time, so KPMG were asked to subcontract with GC Strategies. As I mentioned earlier, we would have been more than happy to contract through the SEPS vehicle, and we would have charged...
Can you repeat that last part? You were directed to work with GC Strategies?
Yes, we were asked to work with GC Strategies, and we would have been more than happy to...
Who directed you to work with GC Strategies?
It was the CBSA.
So the CBSA directed you to participate in a non-competitive contract.
Thank you for your question. The CBA asked us to submit a proposal to GC Strategies for the cybersecurity piece of work, and we submitted a proposal. And at the time, our assumption was, again, being asked to submit a proposal, that it was an ask that may have gone to others as well.
Did you or anyone in KPMG raise a concern about the use of a non-competitive contract for the purpose of this work, knowing that you're a firm of auditors?
So thank you for your question. At the time, we were being asked to submit the proposal by the government, and we assumed that the government was using vehicles that were authorized. And again, we were under the assumption that there may be others also being asked to submit a proposal in a similar capacity. And so we were under the assumption it was somewhat competitive.
KPMG is a very large firm. You know, you do work across the country and albeit across the world. You spoke about your global network and the ability to second information very quickly. So it makes sense that you could have raised the alarm or concern that you would be more competitive than GC Strategies, don't you think?
Well, again, thank you for your question. We do not, KPMG does not know why the government chose the particular mode of contract it did. At the time, all we knew was that the government had asked us around our capabilities for this piece of work and had asked us to submit the proposal to GC Strategies. We did not also know the relationship that GC Strategies had with the government, or indeed what they were going to be charging the government for the piece of work that we ultimately performed.
And just to that point, and I appreciate your frankness of these answers, the value of the task authorization and the total contracts you mentioned for cybersecurity, let's focus on that for a second. The cybersecurity work that you had just mentioned in previous questions, that totaled the amount of $400,000, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
However, when we look at the task authorization submitted by GC Strategies, it totaled $540,000, the invoices of which are $40,000. Would assume that $90,000 went to GC Strategies. Would you agree? Or did KPMG take a share of that?
Thank you for your question. KPMG is unaware of the figure that GC Strategies charged to the government. We did not have any line of sight or visibility into that at all.
The Auditor General found that the Public Health Agency of Canada awarded a professional contract task authorization using a non-competitive approach to KPMG. However, found no documentation of the initial communications or the reasons why the agency did not consider or select another eligible contract to carry out the work. And you confirmed some of these details with us today. Do you or KPMG have any communication, email or communication by letter or mail, to the effect of those contracts, and how this information could be supplied to our committee in regards to the initial communications for the work on the task authorization to KPMG?
Thank you for the member's question. I'll take that one. So with respect to the initial task authorization, as I said, we were direct contracted through the CEPS vehicle that I mentioned earlier. For the subsequent contracts that were directly contracted through the Public Health Agency, we were under the impression that the Public Health Agency was providing documentation and justification to their contracting authority to provide the reasons for the direct award. We don't have any email communications as such that you're identifying, but we were under the impression that they had provided the documentation to their contracting authorities as required.
So you have
Thank
no
you,
information
Mr. Gillet.
about that.
That is your time. The witness.
Thank you, Chair.
I want to make sure the witness had a fulsome time for answer, but you're over. Turning out to beginning our second round. Our second round consists of six slots. Mr. Brock, you have the first, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for your attendance today. Since Justin Trudeau formed government, KPMG has been one of the leading recipients of government contracts to the tune of almost $250 million. Of that, we hear today your work surrounding the ArriveCAN app and implementation is roughly $5 million. Now, I've listened very carefully to your evidence. I've heard references to the CBSA. I've heard references to public health. Have there been any other ministries involved?
Thank you very much for the member's question. KPMG has been doing business with the
Not
federal
asking that
government for
question.
many years.
Not asking that question. In relation to the ArriveCAN app
Okay.
and implementation, were you working other than with Public Health and CBSA, any other ministries?
Thank you for the member's question, and thank you for clarifying the question. For the Public Health Agency work we did, we were aware that there were ongoing discussions with other government departments as part of operational implementation of the program. We were not contracted by, nor did we have any direct contracting or procurement-related discussions as it related to ArriveCAN to support that work.
Okay, so let's talk about the contracts. We talked about the competitive contract that you were asked to bid on. We also know through the Auditor General's report there were a number of non-competitive contracts that you were ultimately awarded. So just the number, how many were competitive and how many were non-competitive?
Thank you for the member's question. So the initial TA was the competitive SEPs. So that was the
Is that the only one?
for the.
Is that the only one that was competitive?
That is correct for the Public Health Agency related work.
Right.
And if I may, there were then 2 subsequent contracts directly awarded by the Public Health Agency to KPMG.
That were non-competitive.
That is correct. They
Okay.
were directed to us.
Okay, and what about through CBSA?
Thank you. The work that we did on the cybersecurity front, there were 2 contracts that were with GC Strategies. There was no contract direct with the CBSA.
You were non-competitive as well, correct?
Thank
You
you.
weren't bidding with other companies. You were asked to work with GC Strategies, so it was a non-competitive contract.
Thank you. We were asked to submit a proposal to
Right.
GC Strategies,
Which was ultimately granted.
which was granted.
Right. So 2 with CBSA, 2 with PHAC, that's 4, and 1 was competitive for $5 million. How many employees for those 5 contracts worked on that for $5 million? How many employees at KPMG?
Thank you for the member's question. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I can say that over the close to 2.5 years of time that we supported the Public Health Agency, we had a number of people. So I was the engagement partner, but we had a number of people. I think on the original TA, we might have had 10 or 15 people that were identified that participated in some initial stakeholder engagement.
Okay.
And then as time went on, we
Okay,
had.
so let's move on to the issue now that you were directed by CBSA to work directly with GC Strategies. You indicated, sir, when pressed, that was Mr. Antonio Utano, right?
Thank you for your question. That is correct.
Yes. Did he reach out directly to you or another partner?
Thank you. Mr. Utano reached out to our federal government practice. And
And what does
then
that mean?
So KPMG has a number of industry specialists.
Yeah.
And
Who did he
teams.
speak with at KPMG?
Thank you. He ultimately spoke with a partner in our cybersecurity.
Who?
So the partner's name in the cybersecurity team was Mr. Imran Bashir.
Okay. All right. And how was that communicated? Was it
Thank
a
you for-
phone call? Was it an email? Was it a text?
Thank you. The initial conversation was through email.
Through
the
email.
initial reach out was through email.
Do you
yes.
still have a copy of that email?
Thank you. I would need to investigate and check.
Okay. I'll be asking you within the time permitted by this committee to tender that email. In fact, any and all correspondence, written correspondence, whether that's snail mail, email, a text message, any correspondence between CBSA and KPMG to work specifically with GC. Can you provide that to us?
Thank you. We will definitely have a look to see what we have and what we can provide and get back to you.
Okay. Were you communicating at all with any other member of the CBSA team?
Thank you for your question. No, not to my knowledge.
Were you communicating with any elected official? The
Thank you
president
again.
of the CBSA, the deputy minister, the minister of public safety,
Mr. Brock, your
anything
time
like
is up.
that?
I'm going to allow an answer, but
Thank you. No.
All right.
thank you very much.
And Chair, could we identify the timeline, please?
I will at the end, but yes, we'll come back to requested documents, and I will explain how that works. Ms. Khalid, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Joining us virtually, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Just to build a little bit of context in some of the questions that my colleague had asked. Now, how much did the Harper government award to KPMG while they were in power?
Thank you for the member's question. I'm not aware of the answer to that question, but as I said before, KPMG has been very proud to support the federal government for a very long time, for many, many years, well before this body of work.
Are you able to get us an answer to that question?
Thank you very much for the member's question. We can certainly endeavor to check that out and follow up with the committee afterward if you'd like.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, I know that the issue that we're discussing here is not whether the ArriveCan app was a success or a failure. We're talking about the costs of the app. And, there's been a lot of disappointment, myself included, as to how this money was spent and the process through our federal government as to how it was spent. But it seems to be more and more a systemic problem. And you, having worked with various governments over past decades, perhaps can help us understand that a little bit. Now, I know that when the Conservatives were in power, they were paying Deloitte $90,000 a day to teach them how to cut costs. And there was a quote from the late Jim Flaherty, who was the finance minister, who says, "Private sector advice is valuable, it's important, it's essential." Now, can I get perhaps your viewpoints on how the private sector does lend a hand, especially in instances where with the pandemic that we were facing?
Thank you for the member's question. I can answer that in respect of when clients reach out, and by the way, we've worked for clients at the federal level, the provincial level, the municipal level, public sector, private sector. I myself work largely in the public sector healthcare arena. And we find that when clients reach out to ask for consulting support, it's typically for two major reasons. One is that they lack specific expertise or capabilities that are required to address a specific problem within their organization. And the second reason is that perhaps they might need more capacity in a very short period of time to address time-sensitive or urgent requirements. And I think coming back to the experience that at least KPMG had in this instance that we're talking about this morning, we certainly felt that we were being asked to provide exactly support in those two areas for both Public Health Agency as well as the CBSA.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, has KPMG worked with GC strategies on other projects and any various iterations of GC strategies as they have worked with government over the years?
I can take that one. We have not worked with GC strategies prior to the engagement in question, nor have we worked with them after.
And would you be aware if a GC was working under a different name, would your answer still qualify for that?
Thank you for your question. Yes, I believe my answer would qualify.
And has KPMG worked with Coradix or Dalian or Curadel companies in the past?
Thank you for your question. To my knowledge, we have not.
And how do you, in KPMG, work with your employees and your contractors as they work with government to ensure that there is no overlap or conflict between government employees and KPMG as a consulting agency? Is there a conflict that you provide checks on?
For any engagement that KPMG takes on, we have a rigorous not only client acceptance and engagement acceptance process, but a conflict check process as well to understand if there are any independence or conflict issues that may arise. We take those matters extremely seriously, and those are performed on every engagement.
And what kind of checks do you look for conflict?
Thank you. We look for relationships, personal relationships, family relationships. There's a series of questions that we must answer for the engagement team and for the engagement partner with respect to any relationships that they may have with the organization and things of that nature.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Najjar. And Ms. Lee, those are all my questions today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Khalid. Maintenant, encore une fois, once again. Madame Secrétaire Dengagé, vous avez la parole pour 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
You have the floor for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to the associate who dealt with GC strategies, I believe you mentioned him, Imran Bashir. Could you please spell his family name?
Thank you for your question. His name is spelt Bashir.
Parfait. Merci, je l'avais bien noté.
Thank you. I've noted that. This individual, when he filled out what is called the at KPMG, where I did work, before you sign a contract, you have to look at risk evaluation. This individual should have seen that it was not usual for a government official, a government employee, ask that that you be a subcontractor to GC Strategies. This employee, particularly if he's an associate, is someone who should have known the reputational risk, should have realized that there was a problem with this. Now, I'd like to have a written answer from this individual because this person should have been here today. I'd like a written answer. Did this individual know that GC Strategy was inviting government officials, including Mr. Antonio Utono, to events, whiskey tastings, golf tournaments? Was he aware of all that going on? And I would like to have this explained in a written answer. Thank you.
Let me just interrupt for a second here. So how the House Commons committees work is we seek information from witnesses. Members will request information, which we hope witnesses will provide. If you're agreeable to that, we typically hope for an answer within 2 or 3 weeks, at which point the committee analysts will reach out. You're probably aware of this. I'm going to state it anyway, just so you're aware. Committees have the power to call documents to be brought forward as well, and those powers are quite sweeping. So we do encourage witnesses to, as much as possible, work with the committees to provide documents. Now, it is quite an extreme measure for committees to compel documents to be brought forward, but it has happened even in this Parliament as well. So I thought I should probably just state that. I was going to say generally it's an agreeable practice. Witnesses are here to help committee members understand us and do endeavor to provide documents. But I just thought I would just give you that information, and I'll now turn the clock back on. If you have a question for me, yes, go ahead.
Is it our responsibility to remember everything that's being asked of us, or will we get a summary? Or
good question. The analysts will turn back to you and provide a list of what the committee members, which is why I also endeavor to from the chair confirm that you've understood the request as well. I would not want to put a witness in a position where a member has asked for a document and you were not aware, or the request kind of flew over in a way. I believe Mr. Brock was quite clear on what he's hoping to receive, and it was just a question of the timeline that I wanted to highlight at the end, but I thought I'd better do that right now. But yes, we will loop back around with you and provide information to you. And if there are concerns, you can flag that with the committee, and we'll of course consider that. But as I said, the powers of House Commons committees are quite sweeping when it comes to information. So I'll turn things back to you to answer that question from Madame Dengagné about that. Or if you'd like, she can ask it again now that I've spent a few minutes. Why don't you go ahead and do that again, Natalie? I've stopped the clock, and I'll run it again once you're done the question. Go ahead. Yes.
Okay.
So I was asking his associate to provide us with a written answer. This individual who was in direct contact with GC Strategy, because Mr. Bashir aware of the fact that the two individuals from GC Strategies were inviting government members to events like whiskey tastings and golf tournaments, etc. Was he aware of this?
I'm going to start the clock again right now. If you had a minute to
J'ai
go.
combien de temps, Monsieur le Président? Une minute?
How much time do I have remaining? 1 minute? Thank you.
Je passerai à la...
So I will turn to my second question.
You could work with your colleague to provide.
thank you. Yes, we can work with Mr. Bashir to try and provide that.
Thank you. Committee appreciates it. Madame Secrétaire, Desgagnés, 1 minute, s'il vous plaît.
1 minute. Thank you. I'll turn to my next question. The Auditor General in a report said that when there were invoices to be submitted under this contract that KPMG had with the government, the invoices became less and less clear as to what tasks were fulfilled, and then so the price and the value of the contracts went up, and the length of time of the contract was extended, and the invoices were less specific as to what was actually done. When you fill out an invoice that's sent to a client, I know I've done this several times, normally you have to be very specific about the task performed. Even we have to do this for our accounting services. So who in KPMG authorized in the fact that imprecise invoices were sent to the government? Was this Mr. Bashir?
So thank you very much for the member's question. Maybe I'll take that for the public health agency related work. Very specifically, when we were working under the initial TA under the COVID emergency professional services vendor of record, that the very first time we were preparing an invoice, we worked extensively with the Public Health Agency and their internal team to make sure that the documentation on the invoice was satisfactory with their requirements to process the payment and provided the level of detail that they required. So we had it all pre-approved, and that never changed throughout the entire, as I said, about 2.5 years of time that we worked with them. So, and our understanding for just furthermore, with respect to the OAG report, we were not led to believe by the Auditor General that any of those concerns were actually directed specifically towards KPMG. But as I said, the Public Health Agency pre-approved the level of detail in all of our invoices from the very beginning.
Merci beaucoup. Suivant, next up, it's Mr. Desjardins. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I do now want to return to this significant problem, I believe, that could have been addressed largely through Procurement Canada's policies, but were, I think, largely avoided. Are either of you aware of the Public Service and Procurement Canada Supply Manual?
Thank you very much for the member's question. As I said, KPMG always follows the specific procurement approach that is laid out by the government. Our federal government practice is familiar with all of those policies and procedures for all of the procurement activity that we would do with the federal government.
So you're aware that there is a potential or an ability of a contractor, particularly a prime contractor like GC Strategies, general contractor they've called themselves at times, to absorb several task authorizations and then to dispose of those task authorizations by multiple subcontractors. You're aware of that practice?
And for the member's question, I specifically am not aware of all of the details of the steps that you're talking about. But as I said, and I think as Mr. Nijar has said, all of the contracting work that we did was at the government's direction throughout the entire time we worked on the ArriveCAN service.
And at the time that the CBSA did direct KPMG, was that at the beginning or the onset of that work supposed to be directly related to the work of GC Strategies or the overall work of supporting the government in terms of the Public Health Agency of Canada's overall mandate, or narrowly at the time of direction by the CBSA? Who directed that you work with GC Strategies?
So thank you for the member's question. Maybe I think there might be some confusion in the contract. The contracting relationship. So the Public Health Agency contracted directly with KPMG, and I was the lead partner for that work during the 2.5 years that we supported the Public Health Agency. None of that work was to do with the ArriveCAN app itself, or was to do with a relationship with GC Strategies. The only work that was done through GC Strategies was the cybersecurity audit that Hartaj is speaking about. So we can. I hope that clarifies.
It does clarify it in some way. So CBSA only directed, in the very particular instance, the work related to ArriveCAN. You're saying not the work at Public Health Agency.
Member's question, and that is correct. Yes.
Chair, how much time?
If you have a quick one.
In regards to who directed the who directed KPMG from CBSA Has any further communication between the CBSA and KPMG of that individual continued past the time of the original contract?
Thank you for your question. Not to my knowledge.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up is Mr. Nader. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. I want to clarify a few points because I'm rather troubled by what I've heard here this morning. So, to understand this, a senior Government of Canada official came to KPMG and said, "We know you have the qualifications to perform $400,000 worth of cybersecurity assessments, but we're not going to contract with you directly. Instead, we want you to go through this two-person basement firm, which will also take a $90,000 cut, rather than dealing directly with CBSA." Am I understanding this correctly? A senior government official came to you and said, "Go through GC strategies." Is that correct?
The government official asked us to submit a proposal for the cybersecurity work to GC Strategies.
Is this something that you've experienced personally in the past, where a government official has directed you outside of the direct contracting connection relationship to a third party, for lack of a better phrase, middleman, middle company?
Thank you again for your question. KPMG is often asked to subcontract by small, medium, and large-scale organizations where they do not have the capabilities to deliver on the specific piece of work or the requirements, and where they feel as though KPMG can deliver the work at a very high quality level. So subcontracting is not unusual for us.
I want to follow up on that, though, but here's the concern. I'm not going to quibble about KPMG's ability to deliver on contracts. Obviously, you're a large, successful firm. There's no question about that. Where I have a concern is that GC Strategies is not an IT firm. They don't have capabilities, period. And so it's not a matter of subcontracting for another like-minded business or similar business. This is a subcontract from someone who had no capabilities. Did this not raise any flags whatsoever that this was being subcontracted, that the government of Canada was asking you to, instead of contracting directly, to go through a third-party, GC Strategies, which had no capabilities to do this contract, which you were qualified to do?
Thank you. And again, as mentioned earlier, at the time we did follow our strict client engagement processes and practices. And at the time of the engagement, there was nothing that stood out as peculiar from those processes and practices that we followed in following the instructions from the government and contracting with GC Strategies on this specific piece of work. And at a time that was unprecedented, and it was an opportunity to help Canadians, and we complied with the ask.
I just think Canadians might be concerned by what seems to be a very cozy relationship that GC Strategies seem to enjoy with senior government officials, where contracts are being awarded through third parties to make this work. We know hundreds of these middlemen type company are being used. I want to address one final point before I run out of time, though, and that's about developing details and the specifics of contracts. Has KPMG ever helped the government draft calls for proposals that you then bid on?
Thank you very much for the member's question, and the answer is no, KPMG has not participated in that process.
And would that be something that would be outside of the normal practice for a firm like yours or any other firm, or ought it to be?
Thank you very much for the member's question. Vast majority of the work that we would do for the government, whether it's federal, provincial, or municipal level, is competitively bid work through requests for proposals. And as I said before, we would not be involved in developing those kinds of qualifications or criteria. in advance of an RFP.
I want to quickly address the issue of cybersecurity work that you undertook. The Auditor General noted some concerns with cybersecurity work in general, wherein reliability security status was not held by those who undertook the work. Was your firm fully qualified and fully cleared in terms of reliability security clearance?
Thank you, Mr. Nader. That is your time. I turn now to Ms. Shanahan joining us virtually. You have the floor for 5 minutes, Ms. Shanahan.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. And I, too, want to thank the witnesses for being with us here today. It is unusual for public accounts to hear from witnesses outside the Government of Canada, but given that your firm also audits the House of Commons, you're certainly not unfamiliar with the way we work, and I think you're providing some very interesting insights here today as to how consultants work with the government. And indeed, I just want to reiterate the words of one of my colleagues earlier about the importance of the Government of Canada being able to contract the kind of expertise that your firm represents, as was done under the former Harper government, in the words of the late Jim Flaherty, whom I had great respect for, that the private sector advice is critical to helping the government conduct its work. And that, in that case, it was $90,000 a day contract to cut public sector workers, which I think, in hindsight, I think we need to review that. But that being said, certainly in the time of the pandemic, an emergency situation, crises, no one knew what was going on. It was all hands on deck, wasn't it? Between the public sector, the private sector, across the board. And I think, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, that the global network that KPMG had was certainly very instrumental. So my first question is, why do you think that PHAC thought that KPMG was the best fit to complete the work that you were contracted for?
Thank you very much for the member's question. I think there were a number of factors that we understood played into the evaluation through the SEPS vehicle to begin with, and then the subsequent awarding of the TA to KPMG. As I did mention, so I myself have very in-depth, over 25 years of direct experience working with the health system in Canada. And so bringing that expertise, in particular working also with public health agencies around the country to help respond to the very critical role that the public health agency was playing at that time to not only kind of monitor the COVID pandemic, but also to put interventions in place to limit and contain the spread of the COVID virus. And particularly focused on the important disease vector, which was at that time international travelers. And because KPMG has such an extensive international network of colleagues around the world, also working in similar federal government, provincial government, municipal government, and health system and public health roles, we were able to contact our colleagues around the world in a manner that I think the Public Health Agency just simply wasn't able to do as fast as we could. I will add, just further to the member's question, we have tremendous respect for all of the employees that we worked with at the Public Health Agency. And as you said, it was an incredibly stressful time for everybody. And I think that we all felt extremely proud. Our team in particular felt extremely proud to be able to support the government and Canadians during this incredibly difficult time.
And Ms. Lee, would you say that it would, Well, I want you to describe further what it was like working at that time and the experience that you had in this specific area, and do you really do you feel that that you were able to bring a value added that was appropriate, and is this something that we should have full time, permanent in the public sector? The kind of expertise that you brought.
Regarding the cybersecurity work.
Sorry, was that regarding the cybersecurity work?
Well, it's regarding Ms. Lee's work for the public sector. I will have further questions, yes, for the cybersecurity, but you know, is this expertise that we should have already had in-house in the public sector, or you know, was there a value added in bringing in KPMG?
Thank you for clarifying the member's question. So I think that we did bring unique and specialized expertise at that time to the Public Health Agency. As I said, one of the key factors that they were looking at was not only the compliance and enforcement requirements that the Public Health Agency and other government departments would require to monitor the policies that were being put in place under the Quarantine Act, but we were also taking a point of view that it would be really important to consider the actual international travelers' experience with respect to these policies. You know, imagine people coming in from other countries, either returning Canadians to their families and loved ones, or people visiting for either business or other personal reasons, being exposed to all of these new policies and procedures upon arrival into the country, or even in advance of boarding a plane that was coming into Canada, for instance. And so we were bringing very specific human-centered design expertise, for instance, to help the government identify the specific experience. We developed journey maps, very detailed process design maps to help them really think through all of the operational impacts that these new policies and evolving policies under the Quarantine Act would have on not just government operations, the air and travel industry, for instance, but also, and more importantly, to international travelers, and especially to Canadians returning to the country.
Thank you. That is the
Ms.
time.
Lee,
Beginning our third round of four. Mr. Viersen joining us virtually. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. We understand that the RCMP is investigating the ArriveCAN scandal. Has KPMG been contacted by the RCMP in regards to this?
The RCMP has not contacted KPMG.
Okay. We know that the procurement ombudsman has said that 76% of subcontractors did no actual work. How would you respond to that, given that you're one of these subcontractors?
Thank you again for the member's question. I can't really comment on all of the other subcontractors that have worked with the government, but maybe I'll turn it over to Mr. Nijar just to comment specifically again on the work that we did for the cybersecurity work.
Thank you. So the work that we performed with respect to the cybersecurity work, we performed over a period of, as I mentioned earlier, around 6 months. There was a large body of work that was performed across 5 different streams of work that required very specialist expertise.
Could you be a little more specific? Like a large body of work over 5 streams, that doesn't tell me a lot.
Thank you for your question. So again, there were 5 streams of work that related to, as I mentioned earlier, vulnerability management, privacy, cloud, incident response, and secure development practices. And each of those.
What does that mean for me tangibly? If I'm using this app, you're maintaining security of my data, my name, my address, that sort of thing.
Thank you. So we were asked to perform an assessment of the security and privacy of the application, how it protected the information of citizens, and other parameters around cybersecurity, and that's what we executed on.
Okay. Just going back to the suggestion that you deal with GC Strategies, we heard on February 27th that GC Strategies was also suggested to approach you for this expertise. Had you bid on had you bid on a separate from this? Had you bid and lost on the application development?
No, we did not bid on any
Okay.
application development work, as far as I'm aware.
Do you have any idea why your company would have been suggested to GC Strategies? Do you have a long-standing relationship with the government on this kind of stuff, or?
We had no relationship with GC Strategies prior. KPMG is known in the industry within Canada and beyond as a firm that has very specialist expertise in the area of cybersecurity, with a huge amount of depth and breadth in those areas, specifically within those 5 areas and beyond. And my understanding is we were approached based on our expertise in these areas and our experience and being able to deliver on that piece of work.
Has this kind of situation ever happened to you before, where Government of Canada official is suggesting that you pursue a contract with another company?
Thank you for your question. Again, KPMG is subcontracted in numerous different scenarios, but with respect to your specific question, I'm not aware of the exact scenario outside of this one.
Okay. KPMG pays taxes in Canada?
Thank you. Yes, we do.
As a taxpayer of Canada, would you not have concerns around the oddity of this? That perhaps we should flag this. This is something that doesn't happen often, being suggested to pursue a contract with another company. Did it ever occur to anybody at KPMG that perhaps this should be flagged?
Thank you for the member's question. I'll take this one, since it sounds like it's a little bit more general than just the CBSA-related work. As we've both said, I think this morning, KPMG has extremely strict protocols around client and engagement acceptance. So we have to go through a very in-depth process every single time we undertake to work with a new client or an existing client to look for any irregularities, any independence conflicts, or other areas of risk that would either be of risk to the client and or to us. And we followed those to the letter for this.
I'm afraid that's your time, Mr. Beerson. Okay. Turning now to Ms. Bradford. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Najjar, you're coined as skilled in multiple areas of cybersecurity, including information security governance and incident management. Is there a higher risk of information security breaches when you have to run through the main contractor in GC Strategies? So does that increase, the risk when you're running through other people?
Thank you for your question. In terms of the risk of us completing and executing the work, no, it does not increase, as we're directly working with the CBSA for the work.
So in your professional view, is there a higher risk of information breaches when passing information along through multiple middlemen?
Thank you for your question. We were not actually passed information through GC Strategies with respect to sensitive information on the ArriveCAN application. Again, we worked directly with the CBSA team when we were executing the work.
And in your professional view, with the rise in cyber threats and data breaches, does a private company outsourcing to multiple third-party contractors bring any benefit to stopping potential leaks or breaches of private security?
So thank you for your question. Maybe, sorry, could you rephrase the question?
So, we all know that there's increased cybersecurity risks and data breaches happening all over the place, it seems. So does a private company outsourcing to multiple third-party contractors bring any benefit to stopping potential leaks or breaches of private security?
Thank you for your question. I believe the risk remains the same, regardless, as again, the subcontractor, in this case us, we worked primarily directly with the CBSA when we were executing on the work.
And in your role, department and company more broadly, do you provide your contractors with services, or are you hired more of in a consultancy role?
Thank you for your question. Sorry, could you clarify to our subcontractors?
Right. So, no, in your role, like in your company, would you say that you provide contractors with services, or are you acting more as a consultant?
Thank you for your question. If I've understood you correctly, in this case, we were the subcontractor and GC Strategies was the prime. We were providing professional services to the CBSA.
Okay, so you weren't really a consultant in this case. You were actually providing services.
We were consulting to the CBSA, but the services that we were consulting on were cybersecurity services.
Right. So I guess basically, just to be clear, you were doing both then. You were providing services, but in a consulting capacity.
That is correct.
Okay. With ArriveCAN specifically, what were your duties and oversight over the project?
Thank you for your question. So KPMG had no oversight in the development of the application at all. Our role was specific to the cybersecurity assessment of the ArriveCAN application, the underlying cloud platform, and that's what we executed on, and we provided oversight of the work that we performed for that ask.
And so how can cybersecurity and ensuring robust systems are in place go hand in hand with the hiring out of independent third-party contractors as subcontractors?
Thank you for your question. I'm not clear on the ask, so if you could kindly rephrase.
Okay, so the cybersecurity is your area of expertise, and ensuring that robust systems are in place. How does that go hand in hand with the hiring out of independent third-party contractors as subcontractors?
Thank you. There is no real difference in the work that we would execute being hired as a subcontractor or as a prime to do that body of work, and we would have been happy to be the prime, but we simply followed the ask of the government.
Okay, thank you. Turning now to Ms. Lee, you have a very, very extensive background in digital health. How did you end up at KPMG?
Thank you very much for the member's question. So as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I've been in the healthcare industry for over 25 years. I was previously at a large academic hospital network and subsequently was given an opportunity to work at KPMG to help establish and create an offshoot of the existing healthcare consulting practice with a focus on digital healthcare.
Thank you very much. That is the time. Encore une fois en français.
Once again, this will be in French. Ms. Sinclair Desgagnés for 2.5 minutes. Did you read the Auditor General's report? Mr. Nargi, did you read the Auditor General's report?
Non.
Yes or no?
Oui, Madame Lee.
Yes. Ms. Lee? Yes. Good. My previous question, I was quoting from the AG's report. We saw similar problems with 2 professional services awarded by PCP to KGPM. Even though they talked about clear deliverables, the contracts were modified by less specific deliverables to allow for greater flexibility. So the extension was not connected to new tasks. It was simply pushing back the deadline, which caused the cost of the contract to write. That contradicts what you said earlier, Ms. Lee. The invoices sent to public health were less and less specific. There were no specific tasks that were detailed, and there were no new tasks added for the same amount. So that really contradicts what you said earlier. Why did KP KPMG agreed to accept more money and agreed to amend the contract for less specific tasks. Was it the PHAC or was it simply a desire to have more money in the pockets?
Thank you very much for the member's question. As I said previously, all of the invoices that we submitted to the Public Health Agency were prior approved by the Public Health Agency. We never changed the approach from the very first invoice to the last invoice in terms of the level of detail that was provided to the agency. And our understanding, just to come back to the other part of your question around the flexibility aspect, it was our understanding from the Public Health Agency that they specifically were very concerned about unforeseen events where they would require assistance from us in the same vein that we had been providing it from the very beginning under the initial TA. The work packages, the work processes, and all of the key activities were virtually the same throughout all of the contract work that we had done for the Public Health Agency over that 2.5-year period. So it never really changed. They asked for the contracting language to be the way it was, to be less detailed in the final contract from the standpoint of that they couldn't possibly predict what was happening during the third and fourth waves.
Donc KPMG ne prend aucune responsabilité dans...
So KPMG takes no responsibility. I'm sorry, your time is up.
Angela, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I do now want to turn to the Auditor General's report and her investigation and her findings in 1.42 and 1.43 for your information, for your own documents. It talks about vendors. Quote, we found situations where agency employees who were involved in the ArriveCAN project were invited by vendors to dinners and other activities. It goes on to suggest that in their view, existing relationships between vendors and the agency's information, science, and technology branch, as well as lack of evidence that agency employees reported the invitations to dinners and other activities, created a significant risk or perception of conflict of interest around procurement decisions. Wouldn't either of you suggest that non-competitive contracts, particularly with this finding, seem as though, in particular, that conflict of interest could be, in fact, real?
I'd like to start by saying under no circumstances did KPMG feel that there was a conflict of interest in place, and we followed all of our internal processes to comply with our policies and procedures along those lines. And as it relates to your comment about the social events and the like, you have to remember that our work initiated in September of 2020. We were in the height of the COVID-19 pandemic lockdowns. Under no circumstances were any of our team members engaged in any of those activities, either prior to our contracting, during our contracting, or after our contracting. So I do not agree with the characterization that there was a conflict of interest in the work that we had done to either procure the work or conduct the work.
Has KPMG at any point in time ever supplied gifts or benefits or dinners to members of the government?
Thank you again for the member's question. To my knowledge, I am not aware of any of that activity happening.
And in regards to the relationships that maybe have had between GC Strategies and that of KPMG, what was the first and initial interaction with these two groups before the contract, or before the task authorizations?
Thank you for the question. So the only other contract prior to the ArriveCAN app was a discovery session for GC Strategies to understand our capabilities with respect to cybersecurity. And that was a very brief discussion to understand our experience in cybersecurity.
Thank you.
What was
That is
the
your
date of
time.
that?
That is your time, Mr. Desjardins. You will have one other opportunity. If you're able to provide that answer, do you know the date of that? I think that was a question by chance.
Thank you. I believe that was in July of 21.
Thank you very much. Turning now to Mr. Barrett, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
So we have GC Strategies, a two-man operation operating out of a basement that's made millions off of Canadian taxpayers during Justin Trudeau's $60 million Arrive scam. And we were told that they would subcontract the work out to people that they found on Google and LinkedIn. But what we've learned today is that Antonio Utano at the Canada Border Services Agency reached out to KPMG, and I got some of the answers to my questions I asked you in my first round. I asked how many employees KPMG has in Canada. It's of 10,000 and 40 offices across Canada. And the senior official from the Trudeau government said that if KPMG wanted to do work for the government, that you had to be a subcontractor to this two-person firm. Is that the usual practice in your experience of the government, that they would direct KPMG, one of the largest firms in the world, to work through a two-person staffing firm, a middleman like this? Is this normal?
Thank you for the question. Again, KPMG is subcontracted by organizations that are small, medium, and of the same scale as KPMG in multiple different scenarios. I'm not aware directly of similar contracts that have occurred for the government with us, but I can certainly check.
So the government has said that it uses 635 IT middleman companies like GC Strategies, Dalian, and you're not sure how many companies of that size KPMG does business with, but has KPMG been a subcontractor for Dalian or for GC Strategies on any other contracts than the ones that we've discussed today?
Thank you for the question. No, we have not.
You have not. You said Sharif Abdu was the government contact on the amendments to the non-competitive contracts. Did you initiate the amendments, or did the government initiate them?
Thank you for the member's question. Sharif Abdu was the DG on the original TA that was directed to us through the SEPS vendor of record, and the amendments were always at the Public Health Agency's request for extension.
Is it a usual practice for you to amend contracts with the government?
Thank you again for the member's question. Contracts vary by the nature of the client circumstances, the engagement work itself. This was an unprecedented time, I think we can all agree.
Okay.
And so the amendments were at their request.
The amendments were at the government's request. Did you speak to anyone in government in advance of your appearance at committee today?
Thank you very much for the member's question. No, we did not.
How many firms have contracted with the Government of Canada with KPMG as a subcontractor? You're not able to provide that answer today? Was that your previous response?
Could you ask?
How many firms that have been contracted by the Government of Canada have used KPMG as a subcontractor?
Thank you. I cannot answer that today.
Okay. Can you undertake today to provide to the committee that list of those contracts and the contractors for whom you were the sub for?
We can certainly go back and see.
It's a yes or no question. So will you undertake to provide the information to the committee?
That's a yes, Mr. Baird.
Thank you very much. You mentioned you had a discovery meeting with GC Strategies. Who was there?
Thank you for your question. Is that you're referring to the July meeting?
Were there multiple discovery meetings, sir?
There was only the July meeting, and then there was we were asked to provide a proposal to GC Strategies in September.
Okay. Who were at both of the meetings?
So in the July meeting, the cybersecurity discovery meeting was between Imran Bashir and GC Strategies. And
who from GC Strategies?
Thank you for your question. I believe that was Christian Firth.
Okay. So just the two people at both meetings?
Thank you. Yes, I believe so.
Okay. And just for certainty, KPMG has spent $0 on hospitality for Government of Canada officials.
Thank you very much for the member's question, and to my knowledge, that is correct.
Does KPMG provide bonuses for securing contracts with the Government of Canada?
So thank you very much for the member's question. The way that we compensate all of our staff is actually a pretty complicated process.
We've done about $250 million in business with the Government of Canada under Justin Trudeau. We're looking to find out if staff are bonused for getting that work, like the $750,000 that KPMG was paid to advise the government on spending less on contracting.
So thank you again for the member's question, and I will say that no staff or partner is directly compensated for a particular engagement. It's a multivariate, complicated formula on how we assess people's performance against the firm's performance, their individual performance, the contribution they make to Canadian society, and it's a holistic formula that gets pulled together in order to identify compensation for all of our staff.
Thank you. That is your time. Ms. Khalid, 5 minutes, please. Over to you when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Chair, to the witnesses. Now, let's unpack the ArriveCAN app and the scope of work and services provided by yourselves in general. Now, were the services that were provided just for the ArriveCAN app, or did it have broader application within these different departments that we're talking about? I know that there were big conversations about digitalization in general.
Thank you for the question. For the cybersecurity work, the work was specific to the ArriveCAN app and the underlying hosting platform, which was in the cloud. And I'll defer to Ms. Lee for her body of work.
Yeah, so for the support that KPMG provided to the Public Health Agency, none of that work had anything to do with the app itself. As I mentioned before, all of the work that we did was in analyzing and helping them to plan for the operational impacts of the different policy changes that were coming through OICs under the Quarantine Act. And we also helped facilitate a number of stakeholder engagement sessions to receive input on how those changes should come about. And so none of the work that we did, though, had anything to do with the app itself. It was more about how the experience of travelers, the travel industry, the border control measures needed to be changed or updated based on the evolving policies.
And so when we see a number of different change in the work orders, et cetera, I'm assuming that would be based on new information required in that changing landscape?
Member's question. If I understand your question, the work was such that every single time there was a new order in council, a policy change under the Quarantine Act, I think you can probably imagine the pressure that put on not only the Public Health Agency, but the border services, immigration, for instance, the Transport Canada department. There were numerous agencies and departments that were impacted by these orders in council changes. And so, as I said, our work was to help them really think very deeply and thoughtfully about the way in which operations would have to be updated to accommodate those order and council changes on a timely manner. And sometimes there was very little time for any of these departments or external stakeholders to respond to those OICs. And so for that reason, they relied heavily on us to help them analyze in a timely manner what those process impacts would be, for instance, or downstream impacts to staff training, to supports that might be required at different border crossings, for instance, to facilitate the implementation of those changes.
Now, at any time, did you find that you had to do a complete turnaround of information or analysis that you had provided based on orders in council?
The member's question. There were numerous times where the Public Health Agency was expected to communicate with their upper management about what they thought they should do to respond operationally. And so, for instance, there were a couple of times when they asked, actually more than a couple of times, there were a number of times where they asked us to reach out to our global network of KPMG colleagues around the world to talk to federal governments in other jurisdictions, talk to our transport-related colleagues to understand what was happening from an air operator perspective, for instance, or in the airports themselves. where we had 24, 48 hours to turn around a global, environmental scan so that they could actually inform policy and implementation of those policies. So this was actually a constant phenomenon during the pandemic, and this went on, for 2.5 years. Because of the multiple waves of the pandemic. So the Public Health Agency was under an incredible amount of pressure to respond during this time, and we did everything we could to help them to do so in a timely manner.
Do you think that Canadians got value for their dollars with this app?
So thank you very much for the member's question. And as I said, neither the work that we did through the Public Health Agency nor directly, although the cybersecurity work was an audit of the cyber parameters of the app, neither of our engagement work had anything to do with the development of the app itself. So it's very difficult for us to comment on that.
Thank you. And lastly, what steps did both of you take to prepare for the meeting today?
Thank you again for the member's question. We, of course, prepared very diligently because we take this extremely seriously, and we wanted to make sure we could come prepared to answer all of your questions today. So we contacted our colleagues who work in this space, obviously our colleagues who worked on the engagements. We spoke with our legal counsel and our advisors to prepare so that we could respond to all of your questions today.
Thank you, but it was short of reading the Auditor General's report.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes.
No, they read it. They've already testified to that fact. Yes.
Got it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Khalid. Turning now, this is the start of our fourth and last round. Mr. Brock, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Listening to your evidence with some respect, I don't believe you truly recognize how damning your evidence has been to the Justin Trudeau government. You talk about Mr. Najjar exercising due diligence and researching GC strategies, but GC strategies, according to the Auditor General, receive upwards to $20 million for doing nothing other than connecting government officials with companies such as yourself. $20 million. They're a pariah. GC Strategies is persona non grata. They've lost all their contracts with the government. They've lost their security clearance. And you aligned yourself with GC Strategies, which brings into question the RCMP may be knocking on your door. So if you haven't lawyered up, you probably should be considering doing that. GC Strategies testified, not under oath, but there is a presumption of telling the truth at committee, to committing criminal acts of fraud and forgery. And this is the company you aligned yourself with to the tune of almost $400,000. Is that correct? Mr. Najjar?
Thank you for your question. KPMG is not aware of anything related to GC Strategies outside of the work that we performed.
The amount of the contract, was it $400,000?
The amount that we charge GC Strategies for the cyber work was
$400,000. They receive 15 to 30% for doing nothing.
Point of order.
The government could have contacted you
Just 1
directly.
second. Mr. Brock, I've stopped the clock. I have a point of order. I didn't recognize the name, so if you could just identify yourself again. Is it Mr. Biddle?
Hi, my name's Chris Biddle.
Hi.
We've been colleagues for
Hi, Mr. Biddle. I thought it was you. I wasn't 100% sure, so I heard you in the earpiece, but yes, you have a point of order.
I didn't raise the point of order when Mr. Brock spoke the first time. He's cutting off, as the witnesses are answering his direct questions. I know it's an issue of intense interest for all of us, but he's cutting off the witness at all of their answers, even as they're answering the question. It's not that they're being evasive, and I'm having a hard time hearing it, and I imagine the translators will be experiencing the same thing as well.
All right.
You just let them answer.
Thank you for raising that. Mr. Brock, if you just kind of keep that in mind for our I'm finding the answers, I'm hearing them loud and clear, but I'm in the room. So Mr. Brock, if you can just kind of just be aware of that for people that are not in the room, which of course is their right as members to Zoom in virtually. So
Mr. Najjar, you indicated you didn't know about the unusual, if not illegal, practices by GC Strategies, which you probably don't even know this. Actually, your evidence today gives credence to what GC really stands for, Government of Canada. because it's the government of Canada that's asking you to work with GC Strategies. Now, moving on. The Procurement Ombudsman is now investigating a concept known as bait and switch, promising resources to drive up the cost of a contract and delivering less. Are you familiar with that concept?
Thank you for the member's question. Yes, we are.
The Ombudsman has discussed at committee before and is now launching an investigation into this fraud. Is this a practice ever used by KPMG?
Thank you for the member's question, and the answer is absolutely not.
Did this ever apply to the nearly $250 million in government contracts since Justin Trudeau formed government?
Thank you for the member's question. To our knowledge, all of the work that KPMG has done has been under the specific procurement processes set out by the government, and we are extremely proud of the quality of the work that we've done.
The answer is no. Has the KPMG been contacted by the Ombudsman on this matter?
Thank you very much for the member's question. To our knowledge, we have not been contacted by the Ombudsman's office.
Will you work cooperatively with the Ombudsman as he investigates bait and switch? Clearly, you're going to be involved in this given the amount of the monies that you've received in government contracts. Will you cooperate?
Thank you very much for the member's question. And as I said, we, of course, would cooperate with any governmental bodies that would contact KPMG. We have not been contacted by the Ombudsman directly. And of course, we would come.
Now, Justin Trudeau has, during the last 8.5, almost 9 years, increased the size of the federal professional public service by over 40%. In 2015, he promised to cut back on the use of external contracts. Yet, in the fiscal year of 2022-2023, he spent $15.7 billion on professional and social services that year. Some of that going to KPMG. Now, I know that you were retained by the Government of Canada as a consultant to provide an opinion or a recommendation on the government's ability to cut down on consultants. Now, leaving aside the irony of hiring a consultant to teach the Government of Canada how to cut back on consultants, I personally could have saved the government almost $700,000 by simply saying, use the federal public service that you increased by 40%. Now, you released that report directly to the government, is that correct?
Thank you very much for the member's question. Neither Mr. Nijar nor I were directly involved in that work, but we are aware, and we also understand that it's very typical for KPMG to be called in to do third-party reviews like that.
Thank you. The report itself has not been tabled with all parliamentarians. Will you provide this committee with a full report?
Thank you very much for the member's question. As I said, neither of us were involved in that work, so I can't comment on
Someone at KPMG was, and will you find out who was responsible for conducting the work and to provide this committee with a report? Yes or no?
Thank you, Mr. Brock. Is that something you could endeavor to get back to the committee about?
Thank you. I was just simply going to say that our understanding was if the work was done for the government, it would definitely be on the public record. And if we're allowed to disclose without violating confidentiality, then of course we would.
That's
be happy
fine.
to
We'll
comply.
take it one step at a time. If you're able to get back to us on the status of that, and I'll work with the analysts at this side to see if that's available, and if you could report back to us on any limitations you have. I do understand there are obviously client privileges. Parliament supersedes that, but we're not there yet. So let's just see where it's at first as a first step. Ms. Shanahan, you're up again for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I can understand the direction of Mr. Brock's questions and certainly Mr. Barrett's questions regarding the practices of KPMG with senior government officials, because, of course, we know that KPMG publicly had its senior officials meeting with top Conservative cabinet ministers In 2014 and 2015, the revenue minister at the time, Carrie Lynn Finley, the finance minister at the time, Joe Oliver, and Prime Minister Stephen Harper, former Prime Minister, were all very happy to appear in public with officials from KPMG's tax department during a time when the CRA auditors were conducting an investigation into the accounting firms, to the KPMG accounting firms' tax schemes, and seeking names of multi-million-dollar clients. So I can understand the direction of these questions because, of course, the opposition is desperate to find a link with ministers of the current government. Have either of you ever met with a minister of the current government in line with this contracting work?
Question. I have not, and I believe that Ms. Lee has not either.
No, I have not.
Well, thank you very much for that. Because, of course, we're here today. We recognize that it was very critical to have the involvement of your expertise in dealing with that unprecedented situation with the pandemic. But unfortunately, some people decided to take advantage of this crisis for their own interests, including, of course, a conservative insider, very proud to show his donor card and to talk about his desire to be a candidate for the Conservative Party as well as the PPC, David Yeo of Dalian. Now, I understand that you have not dealt with Dalian, and so much the better. But in your client engagement process, what changes have you made now to that process that you have internally, given what you know today?
Question. In terms of our internal processes, and as we described before, we do very specific client and engagement acceptance processes internally in KPMG. We have not changed any of our processes at all. They were rigorous before. They're really rigorous now, but we haven't fundamentally changed any of those processes.
But the Auditor General did note that there was a lack of documentation regarding the contracts that KPMG had. Do you agree that both sides, now certainly PHAC and PSPC have to do their end, but do you believe that both sides should be responsible for making, to ensure that the necessary documentation is in place when a contract is non-competitive?
Member's question. We did everything we were asked to do in terms of providing documentation to Public Health Agency. Prior to that, PSPC, when we were responding to the SEPS RFP, we were, as I said earlier, we were under the direct impression that the Public Health Agency was also providing the appropriate documentation. But as I said, we were not privy to any of that internally with the work that we were doing. And I don't know if there's anything else to add on the CBSA contracting.
No, I think you've covered it. Thank you.
And what kind of contract or what kind of documentation would be normal on your side, even in an unusual circumstance like the pandemic?
The member's question. So I'll just give you a very specific rundown of the kind of documentation we had for the Public Health Agency work. So in addition to weekly detailed status reports that talked about the specific status of all of our activities, deliverables, meetings that we were undertaking, which we gave in writing to the Public Health Agency, we also had all of our deliverables obviously provided to the Public Health Agency sponsors and the team members that we were working with, and those were all quality reviewed by a secondary partner in our firm to make sure that we were meeting all of our compliance requirements, but also providing the right level of quality and standard to meet the Public Health Agency's requirements. And again, as related to any contracting, of course, the necessary statements of work documentation that would accompany the contracts were all part of the package that we had to provide. We also had to sign a form that said that we would maintain the same rate structure and rate card, which was the very same rate card that was established in the original SEPS TA. and that we held constant for a 2.5-year period. So all of that documentation and of course, executed documents for the contracting and so on were provided directly to the Public Health Agency for every phase of work we did.
Thank you very much. That is the time. Encore une fois, c'est Madame Singh.
Once again, the floor is for Ms. Sinclair Desjardins. You have 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to quote the Deputy Assistant General. He mentioned in a previous committee that he finds the whole situation disgusting. He was referring to the fact that a firm with the size and reputation of KPMG would accept to a situation that was very, very suspicious. That's problematic. He also mentioned that the taxpayers didn't get good value for the money that they had paid, and that KPMG had a subcontractor, and GC Strategies took a huge cut for this ArriveCan app, 30%, I believe. So I think that KPMG simply forgot that it had a role to play, that is to ensure that taxpayers get good value for money and ensure that the government complies with the law, that everyone complies with the law. There's one important aspect that I'd like to refer to. In your risk evaluation analysis, it's surprising that you didn't realize that Kristen Firth, who had several meetings with Mr. Bashir, was also working for Veritac. Veritac was accused for collusion, bid collusion. This was accused by the government. This element should have popped up in your risk and conflict evaluation. If Mr. Bashir had seen this is really problematic. I think we're going to have to take a look at your conflict and risk evaluation report, because this is somebody who had previously been accused by the government, and the justices had required that all employees of Veritac should be given training with respect to bid rigging, and that Mr. Firth had been previously involved with this issue. So my final question today is, and I would like you to really weigh your words, do you feel that KGPM has a role to play in all this and in ensuring that the law was respected and in ensuring that that taxpayers have good value for money? I would like and I would really have liked to have seen Mr. Bashir here today.
Thank you for your question. I'm extremely proud of the work that KPMG performed on the cybersecurity request. I think we provided tremendous value to the citizens of this country. And any situation where we as KPMG can help the government and citizens further safeguard and secure their information and provide recommendations that would help to do so, in my opinion, is providing tremendous value, and that's exactly what we did. We provided multiple areas of improvement, opportunities for improvement, and that was following the execution of a very robust piece of work that we performed.
Et voilà, merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Desjardins for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I do want to follow up with Mr. Niger's just comment there. The Auditor General found in finding 1.74, quote, that security assessments were completed by CBSA for ArriveCan in pre-development environment by subcontractors under GC strategy contracts, assuming that's you at KPMG and several others. However, we found that some resources that were involved in the security assessments were not identified in the task authorizations and did not have security clearance. Although the agency told us that the resources did not have access to travelers' personal information, having resources that were not security cleared exposed the agency to increased risk of security breaches. Mr. Niger, that comes in, I think, stark contrast to your comments of excellent work beyond the questions Canadians have of value for money, which the Auditor General has been clear ArriveCan did not achieve. That includes the work of KPMG, which in many regards to many Canadians is a failure. Being unable to rely on our public service in such a way that a private contractor or a subcontract could even refer some work back to the government is a process that is in policy in the Government of Canada. That should there be tasks, authorizations that are of lower qualification that the government can do, this could actually be done. And it's the responsibility of the government and the contractors to identify those issues and then to refer those issues back to the public service. The Auditor General found no instances of that. So there's three major issues when it comes to KPMG in my mind after today's hearing. One, there was clearly no effective cost for value here, something I agree with the Auditor General. And to your own comments, if you actually agree with the Auditor General's report, you would also agree. Two, there's a security issue related to the findings of the Auditor General on whether or not certain individuals for certain task authorizations were in fact security cleared. And the Auditor General herself has said that it exposes the agency to an increased risk of security breaches. Canadians should be concerned. And then, of course, finally, the lack of principle by KPMG as a contractor of the government to ensure one, public dollar was properly met, but communicating that important need to the government, I think, is also one of approach. So I have no further questions other than that of Mr. Niger. If you want to share any comments on the Auditor General's finding of a security breach potential.
So what I can say is that I think you raised a number of points. For one, on the value, again, my answer remains the same. I think we provided tremendous value, and we highlighted several areas of improvement that I think speaks to.
So you disagree with the Auditor General,
Mr. Desjardins, your time is elapsed. I'm going to allow the witness to answer, but I would ask, because your time is up, that you not interrupt. So, Mr. Niger, please, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. As I was saying, I think we provided tremendous value in helping safeguard the information of our citizens of this country. Number two, on the point about security clearance, all of the folks from KPMG that worked on this particular engagement were security cleared. They had the appropriate level of security clearance. So I do not understand how that is attributed to KPMG. I cannot speak for any other organizations that worked on this work on behalf of the government, but everyone who worked from KPMG was security cleared, and we follow security clearance matters and information security in general. We take that extremely seriously at KPMG, and I don't know if there was a third question in there. I defer to Ms. Lee if she heard a third question in there.
If you have an answer, that's fine. I think we can leave.
Thank you, Chair. And I would just reiterate that we followed exactly what the government process was for procurement. Our value for money, in terms of value of our services, they were pre-evaluated during the CEPS contract, and we held those constant throughout the 2.5 years that we supported the work. And just to reiterate that all of our resources who were on the contracts associated with both the Public Health Agency and the CBSA were all security cleared at the level that the government asked of us.
Thank you very much. Just two more slots. Mr. Nader, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and again, through you, thank you to our witnesses for joining us here today. I want to begin by just making a comment about the concerns that we've heard today, and how concerning it is to hear from KPMG, one of the largest firms in Canada, at 10,000 employees, and then being asked by the Government of Canada, by a senior Trudeau government official, to contract through a two-person firm in a basement with no IT experience. I can't begin to explain how concerning this is, and should be concerning for you as well. That you, as
Point of order, Mr. Chair, if I could interrupt. Sorry, Mr. Nader.
Just 1 second, Mr. Nader. Yes. Go ahead, please.
Could you clarify what time we're ending today? I was under the impression we were a 2-hour meeting. I don't know what resources we have, and we seem to be at the end of our time. So, if you could simply let us know.
Yeah, we're down to the last 10 minutes here, so or close.
Okay, do we have resources to go over the 2-hour allotment?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Over to you, Mr. Nader. You have 4 minutes, 20 seconds.
Thank you, Chair. But how concerning this really is for Canadians that this lack of value for money was really undertaken here. It reminds me of a Liberal MP who was once elected and wanted to do a motion on financial literacy, and then of course the PMO got a hold of that and said, "Oh, you can't do that." So she instead wasted resources over a number of parliaments trying to change the name of her riding rather than focusing on financial literacy, which I think is unfortunate.
Chair. Point of order, Chair.
Yes.
I hope I'm going to have a chance to respond to that because.
Well, hold on, Miss Shannon, you want to respond? Okay? Sorry. Miss Shanahan, Miss Shanahan, there is a government slot next, Liberals, so you will have a chance to respond however you like. And I would ask you to mute yourself, Ms. Shannon, because right now we're just hearing a lot of laughter, which is rather odd. So, Mr. Nader, 3 minutes, 50 seconds.
Thank you, Chair. And there is a lot of odd things going on with this Liberal government, so I'll just leave that there. To Mr. Nijar, how many resources did you personally have from KPMG working on the cybersecurity assessments?
There were a number of resources. I don't have the exact figure, but I can get that to you. No problem. But there were a number of individuals at various different levels of seniority and experience.
And if you could get that information, but to that end, the various levels of seniority and experience, was that information communicated specifically to GC strategies, that those levels of experience of those individuals?
Thank you for the question. So we identified the individuals to the CBSA, and those individuals were on the engagement. And I do not know if GC Strategies were aware of those individuals. I believe they were. They knew the names of those individuals, is my understanding. And those individuals worked on the execution of the engagement.
Can we be sure that the individuals and their experience was correctly identified both to GC Strategies and through GC Strategies to the government? We've heard before about them, GC Strategies, falsifying resumes, falsifying information, and providing that information to the government. Can you be sure that your information was correctly provided to the government?
Thank you for your question. So I cannot speak to the information that GC Strategy shared to the government, but we provided the names and the experience levels and the security clearance levels of the individuals that were going to be on the project, and they were on the project, and they executed on the completion of the work.
Thank you for that, Chair. And in my remaining time, I am going to move a motion that the committee invite Mr. Imran Bashir, KPMG's National Public Sector Cyber Lead, to appear for no less than 2 hours on the committee's ongoing ArriveCAN study, and that the witness be scheduled to appear within 7 days of the adoption of this motion. This motion has been shared with the clerk, and I believe she could will send it out.
I'm in a few. I see a couple of hands going. I'm going to suspend the meeting just for 3 minutes. I'll just explain what's going on here. So we have a motion now that we move right into this motion. It is a matter related to these committee hearings. Witnesses, you're welcome to. I'm going to suspend for 3 minutes, then we'll get going in. This can either be wrapped up quickly or something that takes a little bit of time. For now, I'm going to ask.
I just want to clarify something.
Miss, just wait a second. I'll hear you in a second. You get a point of order. Just 1 second. I will. I'm going to suspend now. Please get up.
Why are you suspending, Chair? I have a point of clarification, just because I think it would
because
impact
as a practice, Ms. Khalid, the motion is with the clerk. It will be sent out very shortly, so it's going to be a 3-minute suspension. I'm going to come right back, and I just want to give our witnesses a chance to stand up and just explain what's going on. I'll come right back. So is that your concern, Ms. Khalid, or is there something else you wish to ask?
No, Chair. It was something else that I wish to ask. I don't know why you've always talked down to me, Chair. It's not nice.
Well, Ms. Khalid, I'm wrapping things up with the witnesses, and you're interrupting me. So I'm happy to hear any points of order at any time, but it's odd to say, why are you suspending? Because I've actually started to make that as a practice as motions come up to give members, in fact, often it's at the request of the Liberals that I've been asked to suspend. So I'm trying to continue that practice. I don't mean to speak down to anyone. But I would just ask that at times when I'm addressing the witnesses that members just hold off. I will get to everyone in due course. So are there any points of orders before I suspend?
Well, I have a question. Are you like formally suspending the meeting?
I said,
I don't understand what's happening.
I'm coming back in 3 minutes. So I'm going to suspend the meeting for 3 minutes. We'll call the meeting back into order. I see Miss. First of all, just the speaking list. I'll turn the floor over to you in one moment. But first, I'll have Miss Khalid, then Miss Shanahan, and I believe Madame Secretary. Wait, okay. Miss Khalid, you have the floor. And again, I do want to apologize. We felt I was speaking over you. That was not my intention. I just heard you in my earpiece, and as I was speaking to the witnesses, and just wanted to wrap things up with them. So the floor is yours. And just for members that are wondering, we have ample resources here to consider this motion. So Miss Khalid, the floor is yours.
Sorry, Chair, my hand is lowered. Miss Shanahan is next.
Pardon me, Miss Khalid. Miss Khalid, do you want to be put on a later moment, or if you do, I'll look for your hand. But so right now, I have Miss Shanahan, then Madame Secretary. Miss Shanahan, over to you, please.
Well, thank you, Chair. And I will speak to my private member's motion at a later time. But to this, I don't understand the purpose of this motion. And in fact, I'd like you to consider indeed that it is redundant in view of yesterday's motion, in which we adopted the motion that a witness list submission with the deadline set by yourself, Chair, with the consent of the committee, be set. And indeed, we received an email from you and the clerk yesterday that invited us to submit our witnesses prior to April 10th. Which is ample time for all parties. So I do appreciate that for us to be able to submit witnesses in due course. So I really don't understand the purpose of this motion. And indeed, I would ask the chair to provide us with justification why this should not be considered redundant. And I just question why indeed Mr. Nader is presenting this motion at this time. We were all getting along so well, Chair.
I agree. This was a remarkably well-run meeting today. I think no doubt owing to the testimony of our witnesses. I'm going to stay out of this debate, but I will respond briefly, Ms. Shanahan, because you do ask about kind of the conduct of business. While yesterday's motion certainly establishes some, reestablishes some protocols for witnesses, I don't believe in any way it deviates from the rights of members to bring business before this committee. Obviously, if this motion passes, I would take that as a fulfillment of the desire of a majority of the committee members to proceed, which I think is in keeping with the spirit of yesterday's motion. So I don't believe yesterday's motion, nor do I think it would be lawful for it to cut off avenues that members have to bring business before this committee. So on that, I will attempt to stay out of this debate and direct it. Puis, Madame Sécla-Desgagnés, vous avez la parole, s'il vous plaît.
You have the floor, Ms. Sinclair. Desgagnés. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would support this motion, but yes, Ms. Shanahan, you have raised a point. We could simply add this person to the list of witnesses. But moreover, I have a question. When we submit a witness list to the subcommittee, and they're the ones that does the subcommittee have to accept each witness? So potentially, if the subcommittee doesn't agree with inviting this witness, Mr. Bashir won't be invited. So that's why Mr. Nader has gone ahead and tabled this motion to ensure that this witness is part and parcel of the list. Did I understand the situation, Mr. Nader? And is that how you understood the motion, Mr. Chair?
Commencer avec Monsieur Nader.
I'll give the floor to Mr. Nader first. It's his motion.
Yeah, very clearly. I mean, this is a motion that we want to see this individual testify. We want to ensure that it happens, and it happens relatively expeditiously.
So I would add that, just one second. I would add that obviously when we discuss witnesses in subcommittee, that is a process where there, as you all know, without getting into the details because meetings are in camera, there's give and take amongst members. Given the formality of yesterday's motion, where I see we now have kind of an allotment per party, we haven't discussed this yet, but I see that as, let's say we agree to a meeting, and the government members have so many witnesses. If they don't provide witnesses, the meeting will still go ahead. We can't have a situation where if someone doesn't provide a witness, a meeting would stop. Today's motion I see is entirely appropriate given the standing orders that it will supersede anything. If this committee decides to hear from this witness, the clerk will immediately, without my direction, move to invite that individual. Now, this could also be dealt with in the subcommittee, which would then bring it back to the committee. So it seems one way or the other we're going to be dealing with this. But this would provide a decision today. If it passes, I should say, the clerk would move to find a time and a location to have that meeting because of the 7-day notice. Très bien. Suivant, c'est Madame Shanahan.
Following is Ms. Shanahan, followed by Mr. Desjardins.
And just
Yes,
may I just say, Ms. Shanahan, I'm just going to see how this goes. There is still a government member to hear from, and Mr. Nader has just under 2 minutes on the clock. But if this is going to go on for a while, I might come back to members about excusing the witnesses. But Ms. Shanahan, you have we're not there yet. Ms. Shanahan, you have the floor, please.
Yes, Chair. So I further want to speak to the motion because there seems to be a misapprehension about the motion, which is yesterday's motion, which was adopted. So members had ample time to discuss it at that time. That it's so that meetings would be scheduled with the consultation and consensus of subcommittee and committee. However, this committee proceeds under your guidance, Chair, and that because we were venturing into these unknown waters as far as the Public Accounts Committee goes into, having numerous meetings and witnesses from outside. The scope of the usual, Auditor General officials and government departments, that each party have the opportunity to invite witnesses, which you have with the clerk have already provided us the opportunity to do in this scope with ample lead time to April 10th. What I'm concerned about in this motion that is before us today is that it constricts the time to within 7 days. We already have a work plan, and we discussed yesterday how important it is for all members to have an established work plan so we can plan our own work, so we can instruct our staff and do research and prepare ourselves adequately for each meeting. And now it looks like we're going to have an extra meeting to accommodate this request and indeed it could be requested, it could be accommodated very easily within the normal practice used by other committees and which was adopted yesterday in yesterday's motion. So, Chair, to you, please tell us what this would mean for our work plan schedule, because we were very pleased to receive that work plan yesterday at 8:43 from the clerk. Thank you.
Thank you. I am trying to stay out of this as much as possible. So, Ms. Shanahan, it's not uncommon for committees throughout this building to have all kinds of schedules and work plans, but if a motion comes up and it is passed, that obviously would change a work plan that was set, and so that's the reality of this in any motion. I don't think I certainly don't believe that yesterday's motion is suggesting that members from the various political parties can't bring forward motions for committees, or this committee in particular, to study because it is thought to be an issue. I think it would set a very dangerous precedent if that right was withdrawn. So, as chair, if this motion passes, I will view it as direction from the committee. Again, I don't believe yesterday's motion ever envisioned that consensus mean unanimity on anything, just an ability to structure witnesses from all the political parties. In fact, I think it was you, Ms. Shannon, who said this is not about a veto. This is just about greater input. So on that, I'm going to step back here. Again, this motion is certainly in order, given the standing orders, and I will turn again to Mr. Desjardins. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to my colleagues. I want to thank Mr. Nader for this motion. I do believe it's an important piece of our work, and I think we have to certainly invite Mr. Emran in consideration of the questions we heard today from KPMG. He is the individual. We know that following my question about a discovery meeting that was submitted is the individual who actually met with GC Strategies at the time of contract discovery. And so I think it is part and parcel and very important to this work that we invite him. And I do support the motion in its principle. The part that I'm confused about is that I think we actually probably have to go to subcommittee on is related to the witness be scheduled to appear within 7 days of the adoption of the motion. I know we reviewed the calendar just yesterday morning, and we have scheduled a subcommittee meeting on Tuesday. So it's really, I'd really seek your advice, Chair, on how you want to do this properly, considering that we do have a draft agenda now. This is an additional meeting request. We have only a few days. This motion demands 7 days of the adoption of the motion. Would this mean that whatever work you've done to summon witnesses for our ArriveCAN meeting, this would join that list of witnesses for next week? Or would this mean we would have to postpone that the meeting you intended to have for ArriveCAN in reserve for next week, postponed? And so I just don't know how much work you've done on next week's meeting schedules and witness secondment before making this kind of decision, because I think you understand, Mr. Chair, the procedural difficulty this presents.
So there are obviously challenges that I share with the clerk. As you know, I try to be conscientious of the clerk's ability to bring forward witnesses as quickly as possible. I don't have a complete answer for you, Mr. Desjardins. Again, you're asking, there's a lot of, I don't want to presuppose the outcome of this meeting, but I'll try to answer your question. Should it pass, one option I would give this witness would be to join the Tuesday meeting. The invitations are well on the way. I believe we're just waiting for the paperwork before the notice is sent, but that would be one option.
Do you know who is going to be present? Because that would prejudice my decision. If it's someone else really important to the ArriveCAN study, I wouldn't want to divide my time amongst multiple witnesses.
Well, they are on Tuesday of next week. They are other contractors, so it would fit. This person would fit nicely with that.
What do you know? Which contractors you invited?
It's on the calendar. I don't have that in front of me right now, Mr. Desjardins. I believe there are 3 others.
They confirmed.
They have 2 of 3 have confirmed, and we're just waiting for the actual paper confirmation. And the third one could very well, or
So we'll probably.
yeah, we expect three of the 3. So one option would be to add the KPMG here. It would not be my intention, Mr. Desjardins, to upend the Thursday meeting on the Indigenous issue. This motion would probably force me to try to find another time. Having said that as well, the committee has always been gracious with both the clerk and the chair that if 7 days does not work for the witness, that I have flexibility to find another time. Obviously, the Tuesday deadline could be too tight for this witness, and if that was the case, I would expect that and then find another time. I would take the 7 days as an indication this is pressing, but given the work that we have, given the schedule, given the resource availability for Parliament, it might fall outside the 7 days. I would view that as a strong indication. I would certainly try to do it, but the committee has granted me leeway in the past to schedule meetings outside 7 days should there be a resource challenge or a witness challenge. Does that help, Mr. Desjardins? All right.
It does help. I probably have more questions, but
I'm going to recognize
maybe I'll
Ms.
reserve
Khalid in
them.
a second, but first I just want to consult with my clerk. 1 sec, please. Very good. Ms. Khalid, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. So just to answer Mr. Desjardins' question, I had the work plan right in front of me. So the witnesses invited are Amazon Web Services, Inc., Microsoft, Inc., BDO Canada, LLP, for for the next meeting for the 9th of April. Chair, I understand and appreciate what you're saying. There is a lot of confusion. I know from trying to resolve this in as quick of a time as possible. I mean, one option would be to amend the motion to delete reference to when those witnesses would be invited, and then the second is that perhaps we can leave this motion be and perhaps pick it up again at the subcommittee meeting where members can actually just go in and have that discussion and answer any of the questions that they need to have answered in order to move forward. And there's not really that much of a time difference from today till the subcommittee meeting, and I think it's better that we proceed when we understand fully what it is that we're doing, rather than passing motions that we're not really sure how they would impact the rest of our work plan. And as you said, Chair, there's been a lot of work that's already been done by yourself and by the clerk in inviting witnesses. So it doesn't really make sense, I think, for us to rush through this. I think in principle we all agree that these witnesses perhaps should be invited. I do think that this is a question of timing, and that should be better addressed through the subcommittee as opposed to putting it in a motion. I think that we're all on the same page here in terms of where we want to go with this study, and it is part of a study. It's not a one-off, and that's why I think that this issue is better addressed within the subcommittee and the list of witnesses as opposed to a standalone motion in and of itself. I don't know if I'm interpreting this properly, but that's kind of where my headspace is at. Again, I would like to hear from colleagues as to what they're thinking.
As what I misclicked, let me just respond to some of your points. So first of all, there is no subcommittee meeting scheduled for next week at this point. What it is that Ms. Yip rightly asked that I return to the full committee with a subcommittee report, which is at the end of the meeting time on Tuesday. That time right now is very short because I was expecting more of a here's where the subcommittee meeting is at. I could endeavor to find time, but again, that's a question of House resources. Ms. Clede, I am not in a position to withdraw the report. I think you understand that, but I hear more of a sentiment that I think is directed to the report, the motion mover, who will consider that. And your third point was, again, you expressed it. If you want to either consult with the mover or consider an amendment, because you mentioned either changing the date, if that was to find consensus, that might be a possibility. I won't speak to it, but I will just flag that is certainly within your right. So let me move on here. Yes, I was going to turn to Mr. Nader, and then Ms. Clede, why don't I come back to you if that's okay? Is it okay, Mr. Nader, Ms. Shannon, and then Ms. Khalid? You have the floor, Mr. Nader.
Thank you, Chair. In an effort to move this along, and perhaps I could seek unanimous consent. Obviously, I can't amend my own motion, but I would seek the unanimous consent of the committee to pass the motion and just take out the within 7 days and leave it to you, Chair, to schedule it at. So I would seek unanimous consent to pass the motion, removing the 7 days requirement, and allow you to schedule it.
Okay, I can't call it. There's still show speakers, but I hear you on.
I'm asking for unanimous consent.
Oh, okay. Is there unanimous consent to eliminate the time and pass the motion calling this individual in at a future meeting? Any opposition? I am hearing none. I'm going to, just because we're virtual, I'm going to be sure here. All right, I deem the motion passed then with the removal of the 7 days. Thank you. The questions are now moot. Ms. Shannon, do you have anything? Your hand is still up. I will recognize you, but I do want to get back to the witnesses. We have about 7 minutes with them. But Ms. Shannon, do you have anything to say?
Chair, I move to do now adjourn.
All right. Well, exactly. I recognized her. Thank you, clerk. Please call the roll call. Should we just adjourn on division? Or go ahead, clerk.
Shall the motion of Ms. Shanahan carry? Ms. Bradford?
Yes.
Mr. Casey?
Mr. Casey,
Yes.
we're looking. Yes, thank you.
Ms. Khalid?
Yes.
Ms. Shanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Aldag?
Yes.
Mr. Nader?
No.
Mr. Brock?
No.
Mr. Vierson?
No.
Madame Saint-Clair de Gagné?
Non.
Mr. Desjardins?
Yes.
I want to thank the witnesses very much for coming in today. If you have any questions, the analysts will be in touch about documents. And I appreciate you coming today. Your testimony was helpful for this committee work, and we'll be in touch with next steps. Thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned.